season.
Why?
Missing drama.
Today is September the 1st. We are officially finished with the excavation for the year. It's been a busy season. We've made several remarkable discoveries. One pleasant surprise showed up at the very end, normal archaeology, when one of the undergraduates discovered a series of red hands.
I want to thank you, Professor Fox,
For what?
for believing in me, for putting me on the wall. You didn't have to.
Yes, I did. I needed someone to scrape it.
I think it's more than that.
How so?
Well, I know people are saying it was luck, but I don't agree. As soon as I started scraping, I knew what I'd do for the rest of my life. And it was no accident that I found it. It was as though I knew it was there. It was calling to me. It was waiting for me to find it and to bring
Now,
it back.
Jake,
I'm an archaeologist, Professor Fox. I know that now. And I owe it to you.
what kind of archaeologist are you, Jake?
What do you mean? How many kinds are there?
Are you the kind of archaeologist who will completely remove himself from his interpretation, keep his interpretation as pure as possible from his biases, opinions, way of life, childhood experiences, prejudices, and points of view?
Of course. I'll be as objective as possible.
Or are you an archaeologist who embraces your finds with your ultimate being, the depth of your experience, the knowledge you've accumulated over years of study and observation? Someone who will intelligently and sensitively make use of his experience to bring to his interpretation the utmost meaning, the most logical and most profound solution possible.
Of course I'll do that. But I have to make use of my education, what I've learned.
Then where is your objectivity? Which one are you, Jake? Because you can't be both. You're either here or you're not. You're either this person with these eyes and ears and these opinions and points of view, or you're nobody.
I don't know. I guess I'm nobody.
Congratulations. Correct. Can you handle that? Can you handle and not having an opinion or an ambition? Can you be purely naked in front of the evidence?
I'm confused.
Good. You're an archaeologist.
I didn't mean to make you mad.
Don't ever tell me you owe it to me, Jake. This is your choice. Take responsibility for it. Don't ever blame it on me or on your luck or fate or anything else.
Thank you, Professor Fox.
Okay.
The last of the ancestors we uncovered this season is that of a mature woman. It's a beautiful skeleton, perfectly articulated and complete in every way. It's rare that we find a skeleton that's not been bothered by burrowing animals, other burials, grave robbers, or later buildings. She's preserved just as she was placed when she was buried. We have so many questions for her, but all we can do now for her is acknowledge her and remember her. That's what we do as archaeologists. We forget nothing and no one.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Ruth and company. We're going to have a brief discussion of 5 minutes and then continue with the presentations. We'll have some discussion time at the end, and we also encourage you to come with us to McKellar Bar after, where we'll continue the conversation. So if you could pass around your note cards up to the front, we'll hold on to those and we'll use those later. Are there any urgent questions, comments you'd like to offer right now?
Are we supposed to put them on now, or you're going to use them?
We'll use them for the
you feel like you're wasting time? Are you learning anything? What are just, you can even just say, what senses do you have from either being part of these performances or just seeing them being performed in front of you? Just general reactions.
I think these would be great outreach tools
Okay.
to bring new people into archaeology.
How so?
Get people involved. I mean, like I said, outreach tools. I don't know. Pick an audience.
Okay.
So who
Maybe
is...
it's kids, adults.
Right, so the question is, who is the audience? One question that emerged, I think Annie mentioned, our goal is to demystify, make narratives accessible. Is the audience fluctuating? Is the public fluctuating for each of these performances?
Well, I think the audience is us. I've been coming to these kind of meetings for a long
Right,
time.
right.
And I think a lot of people who've been doing this, you go into the room and all the chairs are set out and someone stands up at the podium and they go blah, blah, blah. People are walking in and out. And that's the end of it, right? To me, the purpose of this kind of stuff has nothing to do with outreach, frankly. Even though we've done stuff with sort of storytelling, and people have written, "Oh, this is great for public interpretation, making it easy and simple." I don't really care about that, frankly. I mean, it might be true. Yeah, no, I'm not getting you this.
Sure.
No. I think it's really about us. I mean, you remember that famous Marshall McLuhan thing? He said the medium's the message. Well, in a sense, kind of weirdness is in a sense the medium, and is in a sense the message. I don't know why we should be stuck in just doing the same old junk that we do all the time. Because it's boring, isn't it boring? Is anyone here going to tell me some more?
I think there's also, I think for me also about the audience being both ourselves and sort of a broader public, whoever that may be, is I personally have learned a lot from other modes of representation, like performance, like sound, that I wouldn't necessarily learn pedagogically in archaeology as a field, or even in sort of like social sciences as a field. And I think there's a lot that we can take out of doing things like this as experiments, as exercises in and of themselves. Even in terms of formats, I could present a paper in a format of a closed session that was 4 hours long, which is much more familiar to people who do like performance workshops. That was more collaborative, or that I came with an idea and branching out in that way. So it's really sort of empowering to do these things, no matter what the audience.
I think actually that part of the thing that's important is that we are not separate from the performers are not separate from the audience. I mean, I felt, and there are lots of people who in here we've collaborated with, and who are part of the practice that we practice. And I think that what you're saying, Annie, I think is part of that, and that is that the kinds of things that we're doing are more practice oriented. So when you're performing, you're practicing something. You're putting yourself at risk. I mean, you do it to a certain extent when you give a presentation, but when you're actually creating something in a workshop, that's when you can really start to get to think very differently about the material. I mean, when we just in the rehearsing of this was much more, for me, I learned a lot from that, very inspiring. If this was the culmination of something that we'd all practiced together, it probably would have been more inspiring. I mean, it was fun to do, but it's the actual practice of doing something, I think, which is what performance is about, and that not separating us from the audience.
One aspect of I guess archaeology and performance that I really find appealing is kind of emergence of the narrative. And I think when you are performing archaeology or performing your research, you're really giving the kind of experience of
research, which is kind of letting the evidence reshape and shape what you're thinking, and letting that kind of come out in performance, because the nature of our work is such that you're literally uncovering things often. And so I think the experience of participating in a performance as an observer or as an actor in some way is very similar to the actual practice of doing archaeology and to the practice of discovering or rediscovering or understanding the past.
topics. So one is bringing up is practice and process. So performance really does make us think about the practice and process. And I want people to think about the connection of what that is in the past and also in the present. So we, in conducting our archaeology today as a performance, we recognize what we are doing as a process, as this practice. How does that relate to what we're looking at in the past, whether it be technology or identity or whatever, in which people are, similarly, we're looking at practices and processes in the archaeological record. So like tying those two together. Another thing is communication that was brought up. And so a way of thinking about cultural communication. And so a lot of times, like we're dealing, again, we mentioned like the archive earlier, we're looking at these material products that have come about through these practice and processes. So thinking about, again, the past and the present, in which way can we think about performance as a way of communicating? So there are many cultures around the world in which text or the archive, or what we consider to be the archive, the materiality, that's not the way in which they may necessarily communicate with each other or transmit like their histories or transmit cultural memories. And that's still to this day. So in what ways as archaeologists can we think of performance as a way in which we can communicate like cross-culturally? Because again, there's a lot of people where that Western epistemologies or the textually based in which we always look at that, that's not the way. And so what are we missing if we don't account for the performance? What are we missing if we don't think about those ephemeral things in the archaeological record? And how do we look for them? Another thing is methods. This was brought up in one of the performances today. In what way can thinking of a performance or the practice of archaeology help us in our methods of interpretation of the past? And a last one is politics. So it's kind of hard not to talk about politics or like community-based practices or like what performance does in terms of the political nature of what we may be doing as archaeologists and what is that political nature of performances. And you mentioned like being uncomfortable. So something that I think that I actually enjoy of performances, because I am kind of a shy person, is being uncomfortable and what makes you uncomfortable. And letting your guard down to be able to see what maybe somebody else may see as uncomfortable, why they may be uncomfortable, why do they need to let their guard down in order for you to work with them, in order for you to be able to communicate them. And so kind of that discomfort that we feel can maybe help us think of what are some other ways in which people see the world that we may not see, and why does that make us uncomfortable? And what can performance do for us as archaeologists to think of some other ways in which people around the world have sort of like created their histories. So we'll go ahead and go for our next round of performances. And so keep some of these themes in mind: politics, practice, performance, methods, and communication.
All right, so next we have Michael Shanks, who's professor of anthropology at Stanford, co-directing the REVS program, looking at intersections of the past, present, and future of the automobile. And he also leads the Metamedia Lab at Stanford.
Wonderful, thanks. I am an anthropologist, but they disowned me. I was actually actively disaffiliated from the anthropology department at Stanford, and I'll tell you why, and I have it in writing. Bureaucratic hygiene. Bureaucratic hygiene was the reason I was excluded. I think it's relevant to what we're doing tonight, actually, that it didn't fit. This is fascinating. It's rather wonderful. What I'm going to do is just give you some reactions to what I've been watching. It's a bunch of words that make me think of some of the things that I've been trying to do, and I'm learning from your own efforts. To begin with just some background. It goes back a little way for me to a book I did, when I was actually supposed to be doing my PhD, and it was a book called Experiencing the Past. And my intention in the book was to raise the issue precisely of experience, and absolutely, you've been addressing that tonight. I would connect it to a broader field, which I think is implicit in what we've been hearing, watching, talking about, which is aesthetics. But I don't mean, artsy-fartsy stuff. The aesthetic is the combination of thinking, sensing, feeling, evaluating. It's a cognitive process as well as one that is, of course, rooted in our senses. That's what we're exploring, the aesthetic. Experience in the past as well for me was precisely, in my own project, an exercise in science studies. What is it that we're doing when we're experiencing the past and working on it? So absolutely, practice, the process. Well, what is it? What is archaeology? And my line was, archaeology is what archaeologists do. And in that respect, the doing is, of interest. Rather than go for definitions, I was more interested in watching what people were doing and thinking, how might we do it better? Or a different way? To what end? Because ultimately what we share with our disciplinary colleagues, but also beyond that, is something which is it's something that's been around for 200 years and more, and it's an archaeological sensibility. It is historically specific. We can see it emerging in the 18th century. And what is it about? We work on what remains. We work on what remains. Now, we can make it broader when we're looking at the performance of the past, absolutely. But if you want to keep that archaeological component, for me, working on what remains will do. Okay, so experience in the past led to a visit from some performers, a company called Brief Grove, and specifically the two artistic directors of that company came to visit me and said, we kind of think your book is interesting. We do site-specific theatre. The two guys were Cliff McLucas and Mike Pearson. I'm still working with Mike. I was working with Cliff, but he died. And they had a very fascinating combination of approaches to, as I say, what they were doing, which is site-specific theatre. Mike is a physical performer. He's in the tradition, a long tradition, 20th century tradition, of physical performance that brings in Artaud, Grotowski, theatre of cruelty, physical performance, street theatre. For Mike, things kind of begin and end with the solar plexus. And Mike is a very imposing figure in all sorts of ways. He's subtle and such, but it's very much about him. Presence is a big deal with Mike. Cliff was almost the diametric opposite. Cliff was an architect. Whereas Mike worked from here out, Cliff arranged spaces. Cliff was a scenographer. Cliff, a dramaturg. Mike was improvisation. The two of them put together, extraordinary. An extraordinarily powerful combination. And in the middle of it all, they were interested in working on what remains. And that's why I got sucked into this world that led to something we call theatre archaeology, which, simple definition, the rearticulation of fragments of the past as real-time event. And it kind of summarizes archaeology, but goes much further. And I'd love to think that there were components of that. I'm seeing components of what I would call theatre archaeology in what you're doing here now. Other components that I've loved, as we all do, I think, working, yes, with scientists, I do, and it's part of our world. But yes, scientists are performers too, even if they only wear white coats. But also the world of the arts, and we've already raised questions about quite what the status of the arts are. And we can connect it, of course, to issues of aesthetics, but also cultural politics, the art market, and such. But I think it's just a fascinating field where questions can be raised to kind of, here's something I think we're also exploring, a third space. It's another space which gives us freedom to try stuff out. A temporary autonomous zone in Hacking Bay's notion of, pirate politics. So third spaces, the arts maybe. And there I've just been so blessed to work with, typically not people in archaeology. When you're asking the audience, absolutely, that's correct. It's important to do that, but really sometimes it's just to ask the question, who's your audience? To be mindful of your audience is frankly more important than thinking I'm targeting this kind of person. Just be mindful of who they are. And so I've tended to work with Mike and Cliff, and we did works of site-specific theatre, where we put stuff on in a place, sensitive to place, in the terms of rearticulating fragments of the past as real-time event. But also other kinds of art workers, artists. And so as I say, blessed to work with Lynn Hirschman, who's local, who's very interested in the mediation of self, identity, the representation not just mediation, representation of self and identity. More of that in a second. Ceramics people, working with clay, which is a different order of performance. Again, engagement. Modes of engagement with stuff we're interested in. And that's what we're doing here now. Very mindful of those different modes of engagement. Not just assuming there's one way, but let's explore. And so, ceramicists, yeah, and most recently, guys who do cars up. They remodel cars, they hot rod them, or they restore them, and they collect them and drive them. Old cars or new cars, but driving as performance and modification of that experience. It's quite a fascinating world. And even visual artists, Paul Noble has become a great collaborator, and his work is just extraordinary. And again, I would say, quite archaeological in working in a particular medium on what's left. Okay, so that's kind of a quick background and sets up a few headings that I would just put in front of you. What I kind of want to do is just say, hey, you know, this is not a ghetto. We actually have the stage, to use the metaphor. And the guys out there who are doing their academic stuff, they're in the ghetto. They're the ones who are in the narrow field. We're the ones who are much broader. Whether that's outreach, I don't think of course we can take that in, or whether it's just being mindful, again, use that word, mindful of what we do. Okay, so what's one of the big frames within which we're in? It's rhetoric. It's an old field. It's a classical field. I'm a classicist. It's the field of presenting an argument. But it's a forensic field. You're making a case. You're advocating. You're putting things in front of people. What are the components of that? There are many, but in the Latin terms, there's narratio. You tell a case. You tell the story. Narration. But narration is not, narrative is not storytelling. Storytelling is the mobilization of narrative. Because rhetoric is performance. It's a theory of performance. Narratio, elocutio is the delivery. Gesture, voice, staging, and then things like dispositio. How do you lay things out? Whether you put this first, flashback, or whether you flash forward. Why? To make a case. To put things in front of people, you take care to note your audience. Because that is what it's about. So, rhetoric, which involves some of the stuff we've seen, the playfulness, I think is absolutely right. Rhetoric, of course, involves figures of rhetoric, like parody, satire, taking the mickey, taking the piss, or whatever you want to do. But also joking, probing. It's a forensic field. We're doing all these things here to make a better case. Interruption is a favorite one. To just stop it's Brecht. We're very fond of Brecht in our work, where you stop the illusion and say, hold on here, you're not fooled by this, are you? Come on, let's think about what I've just told you. Let's reflect upon it. Interruption. And there's a whole set of techniques for doing that. Indeed, it can be cinematographic. The cut in cinematography can act in the same way. It's part of the rhetoric of moving visual images, for example. Other things that come to mind. Scripting. Absolutely. We've seen how we're doing it. And it's an issue. It's not so much that you have to have a script, by no means. Mike and Cliff in the company don't work with scripts in the conventional sense. Although Mike now directs the Royal Shakespeare Company from a script of Jesus Christ, is it not? But that is, in a sense, such a wonderful reflection upon precisely the issue. What is the origin of what it is we're doing? Is it a scripting, or is it something else? What could that be? Improvisation, we see, is a reaction to a situation, such as I've outlined, a reaction to such a situation on the basis of your skills and expertise. Tacit knowledges that you learn. What does this refer to? To me, and again, it takes me back to a big argument I would suggest in not just our field, but broadly, science studies and beyond, which is that what we're doing absolutely is a practice. It's a mode of cultural production. We work on things to produce other stuff, whether that's science, archaeology, and whatever it might be. You have resources, raw materials, you work on them in a productive enterprise. In a sense, that makes it a skill, absolutely, it's skill-based, It is resource-based. It's a political economy. That's the politics of it. And you deliver stuff, whether that's an academic paper or an event like this. That makes it, in some ways, a craft. And what is involved in all that? Apprenticeship, learning the skills, a lot of which, of course, are embodied. Crafts are about learning on the job, as well as learning from books. And what is that learning on the job? What are we seeing today? And some of these exercises are really rather wonderful that we saw earlier, in that, it's what's involved in the practice of doing archaeology. There are skills of troweling, say, for example, which you don't learn from a book. You have to, but it's not just troweling physical things. You learn how to deliver lectures, how to write papers. These are skill sets that come through apprenticeship. It's a craft. And crafts involve habitus, to use Bourdieu's good word. Manners. The way, that's Sir Walter Scott, historical novelist, very into the performance of the past. At the time when a lot of this was coming together, late 18th, early 19th century. Your manners, his old term, are habitus. How you operate, how you act, how you stand, how you talk to each other, the inflections in your voice, the relationship of the doing to the delivery of a product. That's the craft, the apprenticeship, the doing of what it is we're doing, techniques of the body. And so much of it comes down as well to agency, your effectivity, your sense of making a difference in doing what you're doing and sharing that. Absolutely. That then is the field, if you like, of a practice or a craft that I think we've been looking at here now. One last thing to end with. The field of performance is so much about representation. What is it we're representing? It's a political question. For whom are you representing the past, and to whom? It's mimesis. The old aesthetic term is, to what extent is the mimos, the actor, delivering a representation of the past? Or of what? What is it that's being represented? And other elements here of aesthetic theory can include another term, which is, it's not antithetical to mimesis, but it's eidesis. Doesn't get used so much, but it's in the theory. Eidesis, the eidetic, is a vivid, lived memory. It's one of those memories that is just almost as if you're still there. It's like those dream states where, oh my God, you wake up and you think, was I really dreaming? I was so there. Presence effects. Okay? When you feel you're present, that's the eidetic. And in illusionary theatre, we can go there with that. Or, in performance, what we typically do is balance the simulation with presence. Because we always know that it's this is not real. We're in a theatre, we're watching a movie, something like that. But the trick is to balance the two. The presence effect with the knowledge that it is simulation. And that is being honest about what we're doing and with whom we're doing the work and for. There's some comments.
Thank you very much, Michael. Next we have Dee Hu, who is a PhD candidate in anthropology at Berkeley. And she's especially interested in issues of control and resistance between the 16th and 19th centuries in the Highland Andes, specifically at Pumacocha in Peru. So Dee Hu, everyone.
Hi everyone. I hope not too hungry yet. I'm going to be talking about a way that has helped me be more motivated in doing my dissertation, which is to engage with my material, my dissertation material, make sense of it through making a choose-your-own-adventure story. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this format. It was one of my favorite formats as a kid. And so I thought, what a perfect way to bring to life the people that I read about in my documents, the archaeological record, the space of the places I study, try to flesh it all out. And what I found was that it helped me with the interpretation of my materials, because sometimes you don't know what's missing until you try to recreate a complete scene, a coherent scene, and what someone's life back then was like, or to make sense of some of the decisions that people made back then, and you think, well, why did they make that decision? It seems like a very extreme choice of action to make. But making the Choose Your Own Adventure helped me kind of understand the motivations of why people would be driven to make sometimes very desperate decisions. So what I did was create a story set in the late 17th and 18th centuries in the Highland Andes in Ayacucho, where I work. Alright, so here is Peru, and the star is my dissertation site. So what I'm first going to do, I'm just going to, go over the conceptualization of this world, and then we're going to run through just a few scenes together, and I really hope that you participate, and we'll see if we can stay alive to at least the end of the few scenes, and then just an invitation for comments and suggestions through the session website, which has the complete Choose Your Own Adventure, since I'm only doing an extract of it. Alright, so conceptualization. You are Francisca Woman. She was born on March 2nd, 1698, in the town of Vilcaswaman, which is very close to that star you see. Vilcaswaman was one of the most important provincial capitals of the Inca, before it became also a very important provincial capital for the Spaniards. And that's in part due to its central location. It's at the hub of many major highways in the colonial Andes. And that's where you were born. You were part of the Tanquiwa ethnic group, who were the natives of the area since even before the Inca. And unfortunately, in the earlier part of the colonial period, your peoples, through epidemics and going to the mines to work, and just bad nutrition, you're about 1/10 of the contact level population. The native groups had to fulfill what's called the mita duty, which is it's basically forced labor draft. About 1/7 of the adult male population had to either work at the mines or textile workshops or other plantations at any given time. You would rotate, but 1/7 of the adult population at any given time. And unfortunately for this particular group, they had to do this labor in the Huancavelica's mercury mines. So 2/3 of the people who went there never came back for obvious reasons. One, the work was just so tough that people escaped, but more likely you just died there from the mercury poisoning and the bad working conditions and the physical punishments. All right, so in order to escape the mita, what a lot of people would do, including Francisca's family, was to voluntarily go to what's called a textile workshop. Right? Here's an example of a textile workshop. This is where I work. This is a textile workshop in Pumacocha. So your family decided to go to one of these textile workshops voluntarily, because if you did, the administrators would protect you from the mita draft. Right? So Francisca's family went to one of the textile workshops, not my particular workshop, but in the Choose Your Own Adventure, she sometimes does end up there if you choose certain paths. But you decide to go to a textile workshop called Cacamarca, which is near Vilcaswaman. It's only up on a day's walk, and so your family rationalizes, well, at least it's close to home. We can still go and till our land. So that's where we are at. So you go there when you're a kid, when you're 5 years old. Your family decides to pack up and go work there. But of course, once you get there, the administrators, shut you in, there's debt slavery. You have to pay for the food out of your wages, and it's always at a very elevated rate. And so a lot of people like to escape, so doors were mostly shut day and night. Okay, so unfortunately your family could not go back to your lands to farm. And that was also one of the ways that the Spaniards dispossessed a lot of the natives of their lands. Okay, so let's just start there. Okay, and that's Francisca, that's you there. And the baby is a mystery. You have to read the full version to know what's up with that. All right, so let's start. I'm not going to commit the sin of reading out loud what is on the screen to you, so I'm just going to give you a minute to read through it, and then we're going to show by a vote of hands, which scenario you would like to pick.